get out of here. Word to your mother.
Ice, ice, baby.
Hammer time. Go with the flow. It is said if you can't rule the list, then you probably are dead.
Let your body move to the music.
Let's see it.
I had a vision of love, and it was all that you've given to me. I went to the doctor, and guess what he told me? Guess what he told me? She walked right through the door. Walked right through the door.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Movies of Happenstance. Episode 5 means we'll be looking at the year 1990 because each episode I jump forwards by 5 years. I started the year with episode 1, which was the year 1970. Now, just to set the scene, what you heard just then was snippets from 8 different songs that represent the year 1990. There was The Power by Snap, Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice, his namesake, I guess. You Can't Touch This, that's MC Hammer. Vogue by Madonna, Vision of Love, Mariah Carey, Nothing Compares to You, the Prince song as performed by Sinead O'Connor, Thunderstruck by AC/DC, and I guess ringing in the decade of indie and alternative, Jane's Addiction with Been Caught Stealing, and we'll have a bit more alternative at the end of this episode. The 90s, or the year 1990, was the beginning of alternative. It was the beginning of indie. I guess it was the beginning of the decade of Tarantino and the indie movie explosion that we saw towards the end of the decade in 1999. If you go back 2 years, we had the podcast, The Movies of 1999, that covered all of that. Now, what I do in this podcast is each month I look at a different year and I select 8 movies that I've never seen before and hopefully never even heard of before. And I watch them in the course of the month in the hope of discovering 5-star hidden gems, forgotten classics, missing masterpieces. But before I do all of that, let me jump into some news from the year 1990 just to set the scene even more. And I'll go through this in chronological order, starting in mid-January when The Simpsons aired its first ever regular episode on Fox in the US. Before that, they were short cartoons that were shown during the Tracy Ullman show, I believe. But The Simpsons started in January 1990. Next week, Nelson Mandela in February walked free from prison after 27 years. So we are living in the timeline when Mandela walked free and didn't die in prison. All of you Mandela Effect fans. Also in February, on Valentine's Day, Voyager 1 took the famous pale blue dot photograph. Carl Sagan encouraged them to take a photograph looking back towards the Earth when it's just a little tiny blue dot in a background of stars. Michael Gorbachev, or Mikhail Gorbachev, was formally elected president of the USSR in March. And in April, Twin Peaks had its pilot aired on ABC. We will be happy to hear that. Later that month, the Hubble Space Telescope launched. And in May, poor old Jim Henson died at the age of only 53, which is a bit shocking to me, who's now, I'm a little bit older than that now myself, just to realize how much he achieved, how much he gave, and how young he died. Newhart aired its season finale in May as well, when Bob Newhart woke to discover that the entire series had been a dream. And Microsoft Windows 3.0 was released in May. Still a pretty terrible version of Windows. Very easy to get it to crash. In July, the first ever 3 tenors concert took place in Rome. That's Pavarotti, Domingo and Carreras. And that kind of, like, when I look back at the 90s, it's a combination of daggy and cool. It's interesting, isn't it? You know, we heard in the music there with Vanilla Ice and MC Hammer and stuff like that. It's very daggy. But then we had the alternative Jane's Addiction, so it was kind of cool as well. It was an interesting mixture of things, whereas the 80s, you probably say, pretty much all daggy. Now, in August, Iraq invaded Kuwait, and that would kick off this 6-month process leading to the first Iraqi war with George Bush Sr. in 1991. But that led to this oil shock, with crude oil roughly doubling from $17 to $36 a barrel by October this year. Now, of course, we've got a bit of an oil shock happening at the moment, and I looked, and today's crude oil price is $88 a barrel, which is equivalent to about $34 or $35 US dollars in 1990 dollars. So it's roughly equivalent to what happened after Iraq invading Kuwait in 1990. In October, Beverly Hills 90210 premiered on Fox, and that's a bit of the daggy side of 1990. And Mikhail Gorbachev, having become president, won the Nobel Peace Prize in October 1990. And at the end of the month, a Usenet posting announcing what would later become to be known as the Internet Movie Database, a resource that we've relied on quite a bit on the podcast. In November, Milli Vanilli was stripped of their Best New Artist Grammy after it was discovered that they were faking, they were miming. Of course, the guy that founded Milli Vanilli also founded Boney M, who were also miming, but and the people who performed the songs were not the people who appeared in the videos, but nobody seemed to care as much about that. Milli Vanilli, just a week or so ago, pulled out of a concert when they found out that it was for Donald Trump, because they were shocked. In November as well, the Super Famicom, or what would become known as the Super NES in the US, launched in Japan, and Margaret Thatcher resigned after 11 and a half years running Britain into the ground. Roald Dahl died at the age of 74 at the end of November, as well as the United Nations setting a January 15th, 1991 deadline for Iraq to pull out of Kuwait. And right at the end of 1990, Sir Tim Berners-Lee wrote the very first web server. So there you go. That's a summary of the year 1990. Now, what I would normally do is I would now dig through Letterboxd and go through this very arduous process to pick out 8 movies to watch. But I'm not going to do that because I think it's a bit boring. So instead, what I'll do is I'll go into Letterboxd and I'll just have a look at, I think I've had my volume too far up. It doesn't matter. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go to Letterboxd and I'm just going to have a look at some movies that I didn't pick, and then I'll let you know which 8 I did pick. Okay, so the Letterboxd link will be in the show notes, so you can follow along with this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at movies filtered by the year 1990 and sorted by popularity, and we'll see that the most popular movies in 1990 were movies like Goodfellas, Home Alone, Edward Scissorhands, Pretty Woman, Misery, Back to the Future Part 3, The Godfather Part 3, Wild at Heart, Total Recall, Ghost, Awakenings, Die Hard 2, so Dances with Wolves, Mermaids, Gremlins 2, Predator 2, a lot of sequels, The Hunt for Red October, Rocky 5, Kindergarten Cop, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Slacker, Days of Thunder, La Femme Nikita, Dick Tracy, Flatliners, The Rescuers Down Under, Arachnophobia, Robocop 2, all sorts of things like this. So that sort of gives you a good idea of the sorts of movies that were out in the year 1990. Now, there are some interesting ones that I decided not to watch, but I don't think I'll dig into those too much because, you know, my reasons for choosing movies to watch and movies to skip over are fairly unique to me, so there's no formula. But I'll go through the ones that I did choose to watch, and the very first one is a movie called State of Grace, which is a bit of a New York gangster movie. So the trailer says the underrated crime masterpiece of the 90s. And the cinematography in this trailer is just amazing. It's just the colour and everything is so great. But the cast, there's Sean Penn, Gary Oldman, Ed Harris. Who else do we have? John Turturro and Robin Wright. That's the main cast. So, and John C. Reilly. So you can't really, I've never seen this. I hadn't even heard of it. So it's going straight to my watch list for the first movie to see. The next one is also a gangster movie. This one is directed by the Coen brothers, and I've never seen it before. It's called Miller's Crossing. So this is quite a silent trailer by the looks of it. So it was selected to open the 1990 New York Film Festival.
Blood simple and raising Arizona. A world where nothing is what it seems to be. Leo, is he still the boss?
The day I back down from a fight, Casper's welcome to the rackets, this town, and my place at the table.
Casper, can he muscle in?
I'm sick of taking a strap from you, Leo. And I'm sick of the high hat.
Tom, would he sell out a friend?
You shouldn't be confronting Jenny Casper. That's what I've been trying to tell you.
I can still trade body blows with any man in this town. Except you, Tom.
And Verna.
Verna, is she Leo's girl?
What did you tell Leo?
So there you go. This is Miller's Crossing by the Coens. I really do like the Coen brothers, but I'm a big fan of their later movies, starting with Barton Fink. I think they had a real sweet spot there, but I've never seen Miller's Crossing. I never went back to watch it. And it's got a really good cast. There's Gabriel Byrne, John Turturro, Albert Finney, Steve Buscemi, and did I say John Turturro? Yes, of course. He was in the previous movie as well. So I'm really curious about this one. So Miller's Crossing is going on the list. The next movie is kind of the inspiration for a lot of Tarantino movies. It comes from John Woo out of Hong Kong, and it's called Bullet in the Head. Not Bullet to the Head, but Bullet in the Head.
我哋出嚟撈世界，唔可以咁易就嚇咋。我哋淨係嚟揾錢，揾到錢即刻教佢睇過。只要我哋有槍喺手，呢個世界就係我哋。
我驚你會越踩越深啫。
So lots of explosions, lots of guns, great colour, shots of Vietnam in the trailer there. So they obviously go to Vietnam. And on the cover of the poster, we have the classic John Woo Mexican standoff where we've got three men standing at close range, holding guns to each other's heads. Tarantino obviously borrowed heavily from that. So this is really, I think the previous two movies, the gangster movies, Miller's Crossing and State of Grace, and then John Woo, Bullet in the Head, this is really setting the foundations for what would give birth to Tarantino later in the 90s. And then Tarantino himself, I think, setting the foundations to allow all of these other indie directors to come along and take us through to the end of the decade. The next movie that I've chosen is quite an obscure movie. It's from Finland. It's a Finland-Sweden co-production, and it is called The Match Factory Girl. So we are watching matches getting made in a factory at the moment. And it is quite hypnotic, I think. It's a bit of factory porn. So I don't know much about this movie. It says Iris is a shy and dowdy young woman stuck in a dead-end job at a match factory who dreams of finding love in the local dance hall. So there you go, the Match Factory Girl, all the way from Finland. The next movie is called Judo, an erotic tale of forbidden passion, and it's by the director Zhang Yimou, who also directed Raise the Red Lantern, which is a movie I really enjoyed watching when it first came out. So this is obviously from China. I'll just have a look at the trailer here. And it's funny because it starts with factory porn, but it looks like they are running a dye factory. They are dyeing cloth. Now, again, this is a beautiful looking film, great use of colour. Trailer looks interesting, so that's going on the list. The next movie is one that I did know about. It's similar to Miller's Crossing. I had heard about this movie before. It's been on my watch list for ages. I've never seen it. And every now and again, I see someone recommend it, and I just go back and remind myself that it's on my list. I don't know why I've never gotten around to watching it, but it is called Jacob's Ladder.
Jake, how come you're so tense today? What? And a weird flash just then. They're like demons, Jeff. I'm scared, Jake. Seen him too. I thought I was the only one. Hi, I need to see Dr. Carlson, please.
I'm sorry. There's no record of a Jacob Singer in our files.
All right, it's a film every fan of cinema needs to see. That was the last line in the trailer there. This looks great. Really, really great looking movie. It stars Tim Robbins, Jason Alexander, the guy from Seinfeld. George Costanza is in this movie, which is a bit interesting, isn't it? As is the guy, what's the kid from Home Alone? He's in it too. Now, Margaret and David panned it. David gave it 1 star. And this might be a case where I disagree with David, but we'll see how it goes. But Jacob's Ladder is going on the list. It looks like my kind of movie. The second last movie, number 7, is another New York gangster movie. So that makes 3 all up. This is King of New York.
Frank White is a free man.
How come you never came to see me? Who wanted to see you in a cage, man?
Nice.
He served his time.
What can we expect from the reformed Frank White?
I want to be mayor.
He paid his debt.
Go someplace where you can stay out of trouble.
But some things don't change.
From here on, nothing goes down unless I'm involved. No blackjack, no dope deals, no nothing. They're waiting years for this.
So yes, if you didn't recognize him, that was Christopher Walken playing the role of the King Headpin, who's been released from prison and now wants to become mayor of New York. But he's a bit crazy. I mean, Christopher Walken's crazy, isn't he? But obviously he would become a bit of a favorite of Tarantino. But who else is in this? David Caruso. Now, I never really liked him. Just do not like him. I don't know why. I think I watched a movie where he just didn't act very well and it just sort of rubbed me the wrong way. But Lawrence Fishburne, he of The Matrix, is in this. Wesley Snipes, Giancarlo Esposito, the chicken man from Breaking Bad, is in this. Steve Buscemi pops up again, another favourite of Tarantino. So there you go, quite a stacked cast and an interesting New York gangster movie. So that one's going on the pile. And the final movie is called Twilight. This isn't a vampire movie. It is actually a movie from Hungary. Quite a grim movie because it's all about a detective searching for a child murderer. And it's filmed in black and white and it features extremely long takes.
Tiszteletem felügyelő. A felső keresztnél 8 év körüli kislány. Valószínű több napja halt.
Mivel ölték meg?
Koronával.
Lehetetlen kísérlet.
Now, this movie does look really good. I like the idea of a black and white movie too, and there's a lot of 5-star reviews. This was almost completely lost, this movie. It was recently resurrected and they made a new print of it. Now, I try and get all of my movies legally. The only legal way of getting Twilight was to order the new version on Blu-ray, which cost $50. So I hope it's good because, you know, some of these other movies I can rent on streaming services for $5 or something like that. In a couple of cases, I do have to track them down by more illegal means, but just because there's no way of me paying for them. So the alternative would be not to watch them at all, which is unfortunate. But I did shell out $50 for this one, so I hope it's good. that's my last movie to round out the set of 8, Twilight, the movie from Hungary. So just to summarize there, we've got State of Grace, Miller's Crossing, Bullets in the Head, the John Woo movie, The Match Factory Girl, Judo, that Chinese movie, Jacob's Ladder, King of New York, and Twilight to round out the 8. So let's just take a little break and then I'll chat about them. So first up is State of Grace. This is a movie directed by Phil Joanou. Joanou? I'm not sure. I haven't heard of the guy before. I guess he's not very well known. He directed U2's Rattle and Hum before this movie. I think he took over directorial duties from Dennis Hopper, who was all set to direct, but pulled out at the last minute, along with Bill Pullman, who was supposed to be playing the older brother and was replaced by Ed Harris. So this movie is set in Hell's Kitchen, and it's about a mob family, an Irish-American mob family that ran the west side of Manhattan in the 70s and 80s. Now, Ed Harris is the gang boss, and his younger brother, Gary Oldman, is quite volatile and crazy. Robin Wright is their sister. Now, Robin Wright was in, I think, The Princess Bride maybe 3 years before this. So that's kind of the Robin Wright era that you can think of, not the House of Cards. You know, she hadn't developed that neck hole that she's quite famous for in House of Cards. She's the sister caught in the middle between them, and she's kind of abandoned the family and moved uptown in New York and got a job in trying to lead a crime-free a crime-free life. The reason why I said wife just then is because I was just reading that she became Sean Penn's wife a bit later on. Now, Sean Penn was a childhood friend of Ed Harris and Gary Oldman. So Gary Oldman's character is best friends with Sean Penn's character. He had disappeared for 12 years or something and had just come back on the scene. Now, what else? So just talking about relationships, the other one that's quite interesting is Uma Thurman. She's not in this movie, but she became involved with Gary Oldman soon after this movie. In fact, by the time this movie premiered, I think they were married. But the director of this movie, this unknown Phil Joanou, Uma Thurman was his girlfriend, and he introduced her to Gary Oldman on the set of this movie. So Gary Oldman, you sly fox. So what else do I have to say about this? I'm not sure. There are some bit parts. So John Turturro is in this movie in quite an interesting role. And also John C. Reilly, who gets, he plays like a fairly well-known member of this Irish crime gang, fairly well-liked, and he has a tragic death under mysterious circumstances that becomes avenged a bit later on in the movie. Burgess Meredith, the Joker from the Batman TV series and the coach from the Rocky films. I also think he popped up in a 1985 movie in our podcast last year. He's actually quite good. He appears in a brief scene and he gives quite a good performance. Look, this movie is quite long and it has a few twists and turns. I will reveal some of the twists, so if you do want to see this movie, maybe tune out for a couple of minutes now. Sean Penn, right at the beginning, he's returned to New York after spending 12 years away from New York, and he goes straight into, getting involved in crime and having a bit of a shootout with some drug pushers or whatever, or he's selling drugs to people. I was a bit confused. I hadn't really read the synopsis of the movie, so I didn't know that he was actually an undercover cop. So I just thought that he was a gangster. And it's not until about halfway through the movie that he reveals to Robin Wright's character, because, they're having a relationship by then, that he is an undercover cop. that was a big twist for me, and it was quite an interesting twist. And he reveals that later on in towards the end of the movie. There's quite a dramatic slow motion shootout towards the end of this movie. Look, the performances are great. The cinematography is great. Just an amazing A-list cast, isn't it? Gary Oldman, Ed Harris, Sean Penn, Robin Wright, John Turturro, John C. Reilly, just fantastic. And it is just interesting that this movie completely bombed. And part of the reason is it's got a terrible title, State of Grace. The producers wanted to call it Hell's Kitchen. It's set in Hell's Kitchen. That's a much better title, but the director insisted on State of Grace, which is in Sean Penn's speech towards the end of the movie. It's a fairly unknown director. The poster for the movie is just terrible. Like, it's a silhouetted figure in the light from an open doorway. But really the death knell was it opened just a week before Goodfellas, and Goodfellas that was the big mob movie of the year 1990. Even though we also have Miller's Crossing, the Joel and Ethan Coen movie that we'll review next, not to mention The Godfather Part 3. So this was really a year for mob movies. State of Grace is a pretty good mob movie. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to give it 4 stars. I'm just amazed that I had never heard about it and that it had never popped up, because it's exactly the sort of movie that I would have liked. But I think in 1990 I was watching a lot of European indie movies. Like it was my gap year between high school and university. And I think, I'd gone through and watched a lot of 80s movies, and, I thought that they were all a bit childish, I think, and I was looking for something much more interesting. So I didn't watch The Godfather and Goodfellas for some years afterwards, but I just never discovered State of Grace. But like I said, it's a pretty good movie. I would recommend it. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, it's just a pity that it bombed. You can sort of see the beginnings of Tarantino in movies like this, with all of the violence and, obviously, they were all crime stories and all about mob families, whether it was Italian or Irish or whatever. But you can see the beginnings of that, the beginnings of what would become really popular a bit later on in the decade. But there you go. That is State of Grace. Next in the list is Miller's Crossing, directed by Joel and Ethan Coen. Actually, I think only one's the director, but anyway. Now, this was the Coen brothers' third feature film after Blood Simple and Raising Arizona. I had seen Raising Arizona on VHS back in the day. I did become quite a Coen brothers fan after this. I didn't really remember that it was them that made Raising Arizona. I think I really discovered them with Barton Fink, and discovered John Turturro with Barton Fink, and also that John Goodman's a pretty decent actor as well. I'd only known him from the Roseanne sitcom. Anyway, Miller's Crossing is quite similar to the previous movie. It is a 1930s era gangster movie. It is an Irish gang and an Italian gang, I guess mobsters or whatever. But in the end, this was slightly disappointing because I wanted it to live up to that high watermark of the Barton Finks, and also the, what else are they really known for? Fargo and The Big Lebowski, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, No Country for Old Men. I would probably rank the Coen brothers movies from 1 to 5 in that order, which is chronological. Barton Fink, Fargo, The Big Lebowski. I just think Barton Fink's fantastic. Love Fargo. Big Lebowski is a classic, isn't it? So it didn't live up to that standard. So I'm just going to rate this 4 out of 5. Same rating as I gave State of Grace. I think State of Grace is actually a more interesting mobster movie. Now, it's interesting that John Turturro appeared in State of Grace and is also in Miller's Crossing, and he puts in a fantastic performance. Gabriel Byrne is going to take him out into the woods to sort of kill him, and he just goes to pieces, and it's quite interesting. It's a very, the Coen brothers' black comedy style. They're sort of discovering their style, making this movie in Raising Arizona and Blood Simple, I think, and they really nail it then with Barton Fink. They actually wrote Barton Fink during the filming of this movie. Barton Fink's all about writer's block, so I think that maybe that was something that they felt that they were suffering from while making Miller's Crossing. It is a beautifully shot movie. It's well acted, but it's acted in this exaggerated style, which I guess is almost a signature of the Coen brothers. Some of the acting did rub me the wrong way. It is interesting that before shooting this movie, the Coen brothers sat down with Sonnenfeld. Now, who is Sonnenfeld? He must be producer or something. I don't have that in my notes, so apologies for that. But they sat down and watched Dr. Strangelove and The Conformist. Now, you remember we watched that Italian movie, The Conformist, back in January. That was a 1970s movie. So it is interesting that their mashup of, the black comedy of something like Dr. Strangelove and then a movie such as The Conformist is where they were going. Now, so that's Bertolucci directed The Conformist. This movie does also have a very good soundtrack. And there's really nothing wrong with it. It's just not quite up to my level of expectation. So that's why I am only giving it 4 stars and not more than that. Now, Steve Buscemi also pops up in this movie in just a one-scene role, and he was cast purely because he could speak the lines more quickly than anyone else who auditioned. That's my dog, again in the background, if you heard him shaking himself off. But lucky that the Coens cast Steve Buscemi because he was in the next 6 Coen brothers movies, I believe. So he really was one of those actors that was in all the 90s movies, the Tarantino movies, the Coen brothers movies, and he, almost ubiquitous. And, just that acting style, I suppose, suited these indie movies that the 90s were known for. Gabriel Byrne is very good in this movie. I really like him, from what's that other movie that he's in? I can't remember it off the top of my head. He does use his Irish accent in this movie because he is an Irish mobster. There's not much more to be said. It bombed when it was released. It premiered at the New York Film Festival in September 1990, but audiences gave it a score of C-, and it generally just bombed. Similar to The State of Grace, I guess, in some ways, that it didn't find that big audience. And with people like me being a fan of the Coen brothers, I've only just now gotten around to seeing it. But there you go. I do like Albert Finney in this movie as well. One thing that's crazy is the Tommy gun shootouts. There's a couple of them, and they just dial them up to 11. They shoot so many rounds of bullets, just completely over the top. And I think similar to the final shootout in State of Grace, you can see how this was influencing some of what people like Tarantino were going to do later on in the 90s, just this over the top. Even Sam Raimi with that movie of his in 1999, A Simple Plan, which is probably his most Coen brothers style movie or Tarantino style movie. I didn't realize, but Sam Raimi is best mates with the Coen brothers, and he actually cameoed in this movie. He worked on some of their scripts. They worked on some of his scripts. But he cameoed in this movie as a bit of a mobster wielding dual Tommy guns and just going crazy during one of these shootouts. Anyway, there you go. That was the Coen brothers movie, Miller's Crossing. And now it is Bullet in the Head, the John Woo movie. Now, this movie is interesting, but it's a bit of a Frankenstein movie. It doesn't quite know what kind of movie it is. Now, it is quite literally about a bullet in the head. Apparently, that's what makes one of these guys go crazy. So just to give you an overview, there's 3 childhood friends who decide to leave Hong Kong to flee the 1967 gang violence, and they decide to go to Saigon and become smugglers. So they aren't really the best people in the world, I guess. So they are going there to sort of live a life of crime. But of course, they walk straight into the Vietnam War, and there's lots of interesting parts of this movie which sort of turn the tables a bit, because it's the Vietnam War seen through Hong Kong eyes, and they enter a prisoner of war camp with American prisoners of war captured by the Viet Cong and so forth. But of course, it's a John Woo movie, so there's a lot of over-the-top violence and gunplay and things like that. Now, the Hong Kong riot sequences in this movie were John Woo's response to the Tiananmen Square massacre of June 1989. He rewrote the script to incorporate his reaction to that. And Hong Kong audiences pretty much stayed away from this film because everything was a bit too raw at the time when it came out. It was the most expensive Hong Kong movie ever made at the time that it was made. And it's quite a long movie. It's over 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes or something. John Woo calls it his Apocalypse Now. Just the whole process of shooting this movie was exhausting on him, the same way that Apocalypse Now affected Francis Ford Coppola. So there's a lot of over-the-top violence and things like that. People have strange motivations for their action. It looks like they were playing around with new editing tools, because there's a lot of freeze frame crossfades, if you know what I mean. So basically you'll be seeing a sequence that will just pause. Like, how often do you see a movie in the cinema that pauses? It will pause and then crossfade and then unpause, which is really weird. But maybe they just discovered that in the editing suite and they thought it looked cool. There's not really any moral tale or hero in this movie. Everyone's just committing crimes. The good guys, the bad guys, they're all criminals. Even the heroes are pretty dodgy. And I guess it's John Woo's style, but it's more style than substance. There's a lot of the John Woo standoffs that Tarantino stole, I guess. And the final car chase is a really weird jousting sequence, but I thought it was okay. Now, I'm going to give this 3.5 stars. It's not great. The next movie is The Match Factory Girl, and I have to tell you, Matthew, if you're listening, this is basically Jean Dielman. It's really, really similar to that movie from 1975. There's a lot of the rhythmic soundscape stuff going on with the match factory, as you heard in the trailer. But the girl who's the centre of this movie leads a quiet John Dielman sort of life. She lives with her cruel mother and stepfather. She cooks for them, hands them her wages, cleans the house in John Dielman style sequences, and is generally ignored. And then she goes out dancing, trying to attract a suitor so that she can have a baby. She has a one-night stand and gets pregnant, and that sort of becomes, I guess, the plot of the movie is what is going to happen, because she receives a check from the guy that she had the baby with, along with a little note saying, get rid of it. And of course, she starts plotting her quiet revenge. Now, there are real TV broadcasts shown in the background. There's televisions on in the background of this movie, and we actually see real footage from the Tiananmen Square massacre as it was being reported in Finland, or wherever this movie is from, while Iris's little tragedy unfolds. And it's quite interesting seeing these historical events interspersed with this story, which is loosely based on the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, The Little Matchstick Girl. There's a lot of static cameras used in this movie, and I think that's also why it reminded me of Jean Dielman, because it uses the same static camera. Let's see, it won an award at the Berlin Film Festival, and it is routinely cited as the greatest Finnish film ever made. So I really love A Factory. Factories are great, aren't they? What is also very funny is, you know how this girl Iris is living with her step-parents, which aren't very nice to her. Her stepdad listens to Australian rugby league broadcasts on the radio, and it is such a weird thing to hear this very Aussie, like Aussie commentators are very different to American or British commentators, so you're hearing English spoken by an Australian in the background, which just, it was so weird. There is some potato cooking in this movie, so Matthew, if you wanted to see some more potato cooking, you'll be happy to hear that it is featured in this movie, but this movie is only 68 minutes long. It's the shortest of the movies I watched this month, nowhere near John Dillman's 3 hours or so. I really like this slice of life tragedy. I don't know, I'm a sucker for it. It's so interesting. This fly on the wall, static camera, all of the sound is recorded at the same time that the film is recorded. There was a word for that. I always forget it. But it makes for such an interesting soundscape. I just like this style of film. And I really enjoyed The Match Factory Girl. I'm going to give it, I think this one's a 4 out of 5. It's not quite up to John Dillman standards. It is pretty interesting, but it's not perfect. Zhudou is the next movie. This is the Chinese movie set in a dye factory. And I tell you what, this is Shakespearean. This is total Shakespeare. Now, I don't think it's based on Shakespeare or anything like that. But what this is it is this old man who runs a cloth dyeing mill with his nephew. And his nephew is basically the slave that does all of the manual labor. This old man's a real, he's a bit of a mean guy, but he's a classic, father figure, paterfamilias, whatever. He's the head of the family. His word goes. He's the big boss. The nephew does all the work. And then this old man basically buys a young woman to be his wife and servant. And he marries her and attempts to conceive an heir, which doesn't go off very well. She can't get pregnant. But what happens then, of course, is the nephew falls in love with this young woman. She falls in love with him. They have a tryst, out of which she does get pregnant. So pregnant with the nephew's baby. And then, of course, the poo hits the fan when the old man discovers this. He goes crazy, but then he gets into an accident and becomes paralyzed and has to wheel himself around in a barrel that used to be the baby's crib. So there's all of this symbolism, which is quite interesting. So he becomes the infant that the young woman and the nephew start looking after him, while also raising up the child. But as the child gets older, the child identifies the old man as his true father and sort of rebels against the younger mum and dad, his biological parents. So total Shakespearean tragedy. Nothing goes well for anybody. And of course, and the other thing I didn't say about the son is he's mute. He doesn't speak. So, and it's filmed in this amazing dye factory where they're dyeing cloth, all these vibrant colours, reds, yellows, orange and things. And the cinematography is just off the charts. It just looks fantastic. I think this film is filmed in the ratio, what did we call it? The Academy ratio or something like that. So it looks Letterboxd, I think so, from memory. But it is filmed in a 3-strip Technicolor process, which Hollywood had abandoned, but it just makes for just the most vibrant colours. It looks fantastic. It is a great tragedy. I give it 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed Zhudou. The next movie on my list was Jacob's Ladder. This is a movie that's been on my watch list for a very long time, and I was genuinely surprised. This movie is really well put together, and I really enjoyed it. It is classified as a horror, which I don't really agree with. To me, this is a really good example of a David Lynch style magical realism genre kind of movie. So Tim Robbins puts in, like, everybody in this movie gives a really authentic performance. And I think that's what sells it. The performances are really, really good. I think this is Tim Robbins' best performance. He often rubs me the wrong way, a little bit like the other guy, David Caruso. But in this movie, he's really, really good. And basically, he's a Vietnam vet, and he goes through all of these weird withdrawal symptoms after returning to the United States. He's seeing visions, seeing all sorts of weird creatures and things like that, not really knowing what's real or what's imagined. And that's where the magical realism comes from. It's not really a horror movie to me. So let's see. So Jacob's Ladder, of course, is biblical, isn't it? And about the path to heaven. And that's kind of how this movie ends, with a real life Jacob's Ladder moment when he sees his son. Now, his son was killed in a hit and run accident. He was hit on the street of New York by a car. That's young Macaulay Culkin before he was famous in Home Alone. And there's all sorts of weird visions that Tim Robbins sees. Most of them were done in camera as well, so they didn't use too many special effects, but they used all sorts of camera tricks to pull that off. And yeah, just really good soundtrack, great effects, great scenes, great acting, amazing audio, and a great, great twist, which I won't give away, but I'm giving Jacob's Ladder 4.5 stars. I really recommend it, especially if you were especially if you're a fan of David Lynch. And I'm talking about you, Will. You should watch Jacob's Ladder. I think you would get something out of it. It's really quite good. Now, let's see. What are we up to? King of New York. So that's my second last movie. I'm giving this one 3.5 stars. It's the third gangster movie that I watched this month. It is not quite up there with Miller's Crossing and State of Grace. I gave both of those movies 4 stars. King of New York is a little bit below that. It is interesting, but it's just, it's a total proto-Tarantino movie, this one. It is a proto-Tino. It is completely over-the-top gun violence. There's no real motivation for a lot of it. The soundtrack is pretty lame at the beginning, but it gets better and better as the movie goes on, and it starts using a lot of rap, which of course was really coming into its own in 1990. The notorious Big, or Big, is obsessed, or was obsessed with this movie. He called himself the Frank White of rap. Now, Frank White is Christopher Walken's character. He's a drug lord who's out of prison and plans to take over New York, playing a bit of a Robin Hood figure. He wants to fund struggling hospitals in the Bronx and stuff like that. But the thing is, he just talks with his guns. He just kills people in cold blood with lots of bullets for no particular reason, just because they rubbed him the wrong way. And yeah, I'm not a big fan of David Caruso, who I mentioned as if I was talking about in the past. I should have talked about him in the future. He's in this movie, along with Wesley Snipes, Larry Fishburne, who's really good, Steve Buscemi, Giancarlo Esposito, Teresa Randall, Paul Calderon. Lots of really good actors in this movie, but they are all playing comic book characters, I think, not like the previous movie, Jacob's Ladder, where the performances were so genuine and believable. This is they're all a bit exaggerated and comic booky, I guess. And I don't think I really enjoyed it much as a result of that. Now, the final movie I'm also giving 3.5 stars. This is the Hungarian black and white crime film Twilight, which just is so slow. Like, I wanted this to be good. I paid $50 for the Blu-ray. It looks good. The soundtrack is creepy, but they've done a bit of an Alfred Hitchcock here. They've just filmed until the film canister ran out, I think. So there's all of these long shots. I'm talking shots that go for 10 minutes, one after the other. It's a 101-minute long film, and there are 50 shots in it, which means I guess the average shot is 2 minutes, but that is still a lot longer than the average shot in the average movie, and some of the shots are just really, really long. Now, one of them is a bit Tarantino. I've done that again. One of the shots that they use is a bit Lynchian. It's filmed from the backseat of a car, so we're sort of looking over the shoulder of a driver as the driver is driving down a dark road, and that just goes on and on and on. And they do this a couple of times in the movie, and that reminded me a bit of Twin Peaks: The Return, where they do that a bit as well. Now, this did win the Bronze Leopard for cinematography at the 1990 Locarno Film Festival, and it won the Grand Prix at Strasbourg, but it just disappeared after that. It's effectively been unavailable for nearly 25 years. It was restored, it was rediscovered and restored in 2023, so that's the version that I got on Blu-ray, and it's now hailed as a long-buried masterpiece of Hungarian cinema. But for me, it was a little bit of a yawn fest, even though I found the performances good and I found the story interesting, this idea of a washed-out cop trying to solve a child serial killer case, but it was just a bit too slow for my liking, and I did find it a bit of a struggle to get through. So anyway, they are the 8 movies. Sorry if the podcast was a little bit chopped up this time around. Join me next month for episode 6 in June of this year, when we will be jumping 5 years ahead and looking at the movies from 1995. But until then, I will leave you with my favourite band singing my favourite song, the very alternative They Might Be Giants, with their 1990 anthem, Birdhouse in Your Soul. Bye-bye.